One of the features of the Gospel of Matthew is that Matthew alternates between sections of narrative or story and sections of teaching, discourses that Jesus will give either to the crowds or to a select group of people. And those discourses and narratives are interlocking pieces of a puzzle that paint the whole picture of Jesus' mission and purpose. And so this week we finish up one of the discourses, read some narrative, and then read another one of the discourses. And so let's talk about each of those pieces and how they fit together. Okay, last week we got into the Sermon on the Mount, and this week we read the rest of it in chapters 6 and 7. This is actually, as you probably know, a quote from last week's reading at the end of chapter 5. But some have pointed out that this statement, that you should be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect, is in some ways here at the middle of the sermon. It is the thesis of the sermon. It is a major point of what Jesus is trying to get across. I mean, the standards are so high. Just limiting ourselves to this week's reading in chapter 6, internalizing of our righteousness so that we're not concerned about what other people think about us, and yet in our hearts and in our private lives we are so fervently devoted to the Lord, not serving of two masters, not getting distracted by the tugs, the appeals of the world. How hard is that, not to worry about the things that are going on in our life? And then in chapter 7 about not judging others and getting ourselves right first before we look and are critical of others. That goes against our natural tendencies. But all of this high standards that he puts forth in the sermon conclude with him saying in chapter 7 that there are basically two paths, the good tree and the bad tree. The good tree produces good fruit. And if we have bad fruit, then that is an indication of the kind of tree that the person is. And then, of course, the narrow way that few will take and the broad way that many will take because it's easier. After all, you don't have to worry about the high standards. And then finally, the two houses, the two foundations, those that hear these challenging words of Jesus and trust in them and do them will be like the one who builds their house on the rock. Those who hear the words and do not do them will be like the one who builds his house on the sand. We notice at the end of chapter 7 that the comment made by the people listening is that, man, Jesus teaches with authority, and wouldn't you have to if you're going to say these bold claims about what it is that God expects. But Jesus says these things, and then in the following section of stories, primarily about miracles that Jesus performs, he is demonstrating his authority. In fact, that's pointed out in the story. Jesus has authority to do these things, showing that he has the authority to command these difficult things as he did in the sermon. But the miracles performed in chapters 8 and 9 don't just demonstrate Jesus' authority, they also show us about his purpose. Notice that there is the link made between the infirmities that Jesus is healing and sin, and how that analogy is used to show us that that is Jesus' true purpose. Not just to heal physical brokenness, but ultimately to heal the brokenness of humanity at its core, which is the sins that separate us from God and that result in death, both physical and eternal spiritual death. Jesus has come to solve that problem, and his miracles show us about that purpose. And then going into chapter 10, there's another discourse that we read, the second discourse in Matthew's gospel, and it is directed to his disciples. And you'll notice in chapter 10 that what Jesus is doing is all the things that he was about, that is what he is charging his disciples to do. He is sending them out as laborers into the field. He is giving them authority to do these things. And he is saying that your mission is my mission. The disciple will not be greater than his master. A disciple will be like his master. And so if you want to follow Jesus, that means taking on the same purpose as Jesus and going forth to do your part to participate in the work of bringing lost souls to him and to contribute to the healing of the brokenness of humanity. So that is the next section of the Gospel of Matthew, and check back in next week around this time for the next video. Thank you.